When early spring it was that year, after a long and exhausting winter, life was rushing in greedily, as if afraid it wouldn't have time to complete all its cycles. Vassili admired the blooming orchards through the window of his train carriage. The train carried him farther and farther away from his beloved capital. Well, he was ready for the good of the party, for a righteous cause. He was prepared to give up several years of his life to instill proper ideas in the hearts of the rural population. It was the year 1932. A bright future lay ahead, and the shadow of war had not yet darkened the sky of the Soviets. The beauty of spring only fueled hopeful dreams and bright expectations. Vassili Gaznet was one of the few who agreed without protest or resentment to go so far from home to bring the ideology and laws of the party to the dark hearts of the peasants, and at the same time oversee the prosperity of the local collective farm. Around 6:30 in the morning, Vassili stepped off at a quiet and modest station near the village of Alushika. He was supposed to be met there by the local agronomist. The intoxicating scent of cherry blossoms, the lowing of cows in the distant pasture, and the train vanishing into the unknown. Vassili watched the few passengers who had gotten off with him as they quickly went their own ways, and then he sat down on a bench. He had sent a telegram with the date and time of his arrival, but he didn't know how well the local post functioned or how quickly messages reached their recipients. He didn't know anyone by face, nor the exact names. It felt like 10 minutes had passed. No one. How long should he wait? And would someone come? With a sigh, Vassili shoved his hands into his coat pockets. It was chilly, and he could use a bite to eat. "Are you the new party organizer?" A creaky voice sounded unexpectedly just above his head, making Vassili jump to his feet. He turned and saw an old man. His face was dark and wrinkled, eyes faded and hard to pin a color on, with half his teeth missing. This clearly wasn't the person Vassili was expecting. "I'm Kuznetsov, Vassili Alexandrovich, appointed party organizer for the village of Alushika," he declared, trying to sound confident. "Yeah," the old man replied simply, eyeing him. "Then let's go." "But I was supposed to be met by Fyodor Trofimovich, the Iro." "That guy's busy." The old man cut him off without listening. "He sent me. Let's go. I've got a lot of work to do. No time to chat." Without waiting for a response, the old man walked off, and Vassili, realizing this was his only guide, grabbed his suitcase and followed. The old man introduced himself as Grandpa Seva. He had come with a cart pulled by a Kamchesny mare. As soon as Vassili climbed in and settled down, Seva tucked the reins and the horse set off at a slow, steady pace. Kuznetsov gazed at the fields and meadows, still captivated by the beauty. Finally, houses came into view. Despite the early hour, life in Alushika was already in full swing. Women were weeding gardens. Men were herding livestock to the pastures. People looked at the stranger with curiosity, but without surprise. Word of the arrival of a party man from the capital had evidently spread long before his appearance. Grandpa Seva wasn't much of a talker. He eyed the guest with suspicion, knew nothing of the country's progress or success, and spoke of the party and its values with extreme reluctance. "I've got my work cut out for me here," thought Vassili gloomily. Eventually, he gave up trying to start a conversation and even down seat off. Vassili woke up with a jolt. The cart had come to a sudden stop. "Get down, Vasya," the old man said, coughing hoarsely. "Go straight through the yard. Fyodor lives here with his family." The party organizer climbed down, thanked his new acquaintance, and headed toward the gate in front of which he had been dropped off. At the barking of a mud-tide near a doghouse, a plump woman came out, followed by a tall man of about 50. "Oh, look who's here," the man greeted loudly. "You must be Kuznetsov from Moscow." "That's me," Vassili smiled. "And you must be Fyodor Trofimovich." "Exactly." Vassili was led into the yard and seated at a table in the garden under a blooming apple tree. The hospitable hostess, the agronomist's wife, began laying out food, which was very welcome. The young party organizer's stomach was growling loudly, announcing his hunger to all. Fresh milk and hot pies did their job. The guest relaxed, became cheerful, and dropped his guard. Fyodor smiled as well. "Our folks are good-natured and obedient," Fyodor said while chewing a hearty bite. "But, like anywhere, treat them well, and they'll treat you the same. I believe I'll get along with everyone. Our people are a bit backward," the host continued, as if ignoring the guest's words. "They believe in things the party, well, let's say doesn't quite endorse, but don't judge them harshly." "Like what, for example?" Vassili asked, puzzled. "There are a couple of old wives' tales. women's gossip. Fyodor replied evasively, just one thing: when the sun goes down, don't go outside, no matter how urgent it is. Stay in until morning. What's going on? If there's a gang around, just say so. I'll send a telegram to Moscow, and help will be here. The agronomist sighed with clear frustration. It's not that simple. Fyodor didn't bring up the subject again, even though Vassili tried to press him for details. After breakfast, the agronomist personally escorted Vassili to Baba Tanya's house, where he would be living during his extended assignment. The hostess welcomed the guest as if he were family. She lived in a tidy house with a thatched roof and whitewashed walls. Everything was neat and cozy. She gave Kuznetsov a private room, for which he was deeply grateful. And so, workdays began. It wasn't easy for the young party organizer to make the peasants change their habits and attend meetings, briefings, and political lectures, but Vassili's youthful enthusiasm was enough to break down outdated traditions. Besides, he had an ace up his sleeve: the backing of Soviet power. The local authorities, respected by the villagers, understood this well, so they themselves encouraged the people to do what was expected, so as not to stir up trouble. And so, little by little, in toil and sleepless nights, 2 weeks passed. It was a quiet summer evening. Vassili was having dinner, and Baba Tanya kept piling more food onto his plate. Sitting in the kitchen, the party organizer glanced out the window. It was beautiful outside, the sunset glowing, nightingales singing. I think I'll sit in the garden for a bit, said Vassili, grabbing his tea and heading out. I'll come with you, dear. The old woman followed, which didn't bother the guest. Her company was pleasant. They sat on a bench near a blooming lilac bush, continuing the conversation they had started indoors. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by a scream. A woman's scream, full of horror and despair, right on the edge of vocal collapse. Oh Lord, Baba Tanya gasped, clutching her hands to her chest. It was impossible not to hear. Doors started slamming in the neighboring houses. Anxious voices rang out. There were no more screams, but several men were already hurrying down the street toward the sound. Vassili set down his half-finished cup of tea and followed. Baba Tanya tried to stop him, but he just waved her off. If there was danger in this village, he had to be the first to know. After running down a couple of streets, he saw a crowd. He approached. Seeing him, the villagers made way. In the center stood Marusia, the daughter of Ostapenko, who, judging by everything, had been the one to raise the alarm. She looked so pale that Vassili felt a chill. White as chalk, her lips blue, she leaned on a woman supporting her by the arm, barely able to stand, and her eyes. What happened? He blurted out. No one answered him. The girl was half fainted, and the villagers lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze. Citizen Ostapenko, I'm asking, what happened? The party organizer repeated firmly. The girl licked her dry lips and whispered, The mute one, I saw her. She pointed at me. After saying this, the girl collapsed powerless, like cut down, and the crowd stirred as if from a thrown stone. Women began to wail. The men exchanged heavy glances silently, and, like an exhale, it spread from mouth to mouth. The mute one, the mute one, the mute one. Evening twilight thickened, seemingly along with the air. A group of onlookers was dispersing to their homes, taking Maria away as well. Everyone left quickly, pulling their heads into their shoulders as if afraid to look around and see something terrible. However, Vassili noted to himself that the frightened girl was not led toward her home, but in a different direction. This fact surprised him, but there was no time to figure out why. For some reason, he really did not want to linger on the deserted street. What was it, or who? At first, Vassili walked home slowly. He still couldn't understand who the silent one was, and why her appearance scared the girl so much. The evening sky's blue grew dense, stars lit up, and the last flashes of sunset turned orange-crimson. Beauty and serenity, but that strange silence. The nightingales fell silent. The usual sounds of livestock in the barns were absent. All dogs suddenly stopped barking. Even the ubiquitous mosquitoes were not bothering anyone. Something was happening on the edge of reality and the other world, where human laws held no power, and it was so obvious that even the young mind of Kuznetsov, raised in atheism, sensed these strange fluctuations of time and space, and these sensations provoked only one reaction in him: fear, primal, uncontrollable, instinctive. By the way, the story begins here. Unaware of it, he quickened his pace, then broke into a run. He rushed through the gate, closed it behind him, ran into the house, and locked the front door with a huge hook. Only then did he calm down. Grandmother Tanya Saturday at the table. The kitchen window, like all the others in the rooms, was tightly curtained. For some reason, this calmed Kuznetsov greatly. "Vasya, what happened there?" asked grandmother, looking worriedly at the out-of-breath and alarmed guest. "Where? The girl, Masha Ostapenko, got really scared. She saw some silent one." Immediately, Grandma Tanya turned pale. A cup of tea fell from her hand, breaking and spilling hot liquid on the floor. Vassili rushed to help her pick up the shards. "What's wrong with you all?" he blurted out in frustration. "What are you all afraid of? A silent woman? What is going on here?" At the intensity and loudness of his tone, grandmother stirred and, gathering herself a little, said, "She's not a woman, not a human at all." "Then who?" Vassili asked with even more irritation. "An evil spirit, the curse of our village. She comes after the Lord's Easter and leaves on Jaeger's Day." Evil spirit! Two feelings battled in Vassili's heart. On one hand, he vividly remembered the primal horror that gripped him a few minutes earlier on the street. On the other hand, the party teachings left no place for evil spirits and such tales. Reason prevailed. The young party organizer said to grandmother, "There are no evil spirits in the Soviet Union. Everything can be explained rationally. Now I want a sensible answer. Why are the locals afraid of some silent one?" Grandmother was silent, lowering her gaze, then shook her head as if resigning to the fact that the guest would not understand, and finally said, "God forbid you meet the silent one. Dare, she'll point her finger at you, and you won't be able to do anything. She'll take your soul. Only Paulina can dissuade her, but you won't go to her. Your faith won't allow it." Without waiting for an answer, grandmother went to her bedroom and closed the door, leaving the stunned and saddened guest deep in thought and full of questions. "What faith?" Vassili muttered to himself in frustration. "Why do superstitions take such a deep root in people's hearts? A crazy woman roams, and everyone is afraid. We need to catch her, lock her in a clinic, and expose all these fears to ridicule. Maybe then they'll understand. I'll go out right now, find her, and detain her, and in the morning, we'll see who's the believer here." Fired up by his own indignation, the young party organizer jumped up and headed for the door, but stopped near it. He reached out to remove the hook, but felt a panic attack of such strength that his body began to shake uncontrollably. Abandoning the spontaneous idea, he returned to the kitchen, sat down for a while, reproaching himself for cowardice, and then went to sleep. The next morning was gray and foggy. Almost all able-bodied villagers gathered for the political briefing, but Kuznetsov searched the crowd for yesterday's victim. She was not there. She also did not come to work. Vassili tried to ask the locals where Marya was, but everyone, avoiding eye contact, evaded conversation. Her father only said coldly that the daughter was ill and stayed home. At the party organizer's threat to mark her as absent without excuse, he only smirked and turned away indifferently. Deciding to wait, Vassili engaged in his work, trying not to think about the previous evening's events. However, the girl did not appear on the second or third day. Her father avoided meeting with the insistent party organizer in every possible way. Then Vassili decided to visit him at home and talk to Marya personally. He left his office and decided to take a walk along the village street drowning in spring bloom. Passing near the forest, he suddenly saw something that stirred his indignation. Marya was walking arm in arm with another girl. Moreover, the second girl was completely unfamiliar to him. No, he would have noticed such a one. Black shiny braid down past the waist, wasp waist, graceful hands, skin white as if never touched by the sun. This stranger sharply stood out against the background of all village residents, as if made from a different dough. But in the party organizer's mind was only this: not only was Marya skipping work, but this other young lady had never appeared on the collective farm. Burning with anger and party duty, Vassili followed the rule breakers, firmly intending to hold them accountable. Meanwhile, Marya and the stranger entered a yard and disappeared into a hut. Grabbing the arm of an old man passing by, Kuznetsov asked, "Who lives there?" "That's Paulina's house." "Which Paulina?" But the old man wrenched his arm away and quickly shuffled on, showing by his whole demeanor that he was not going to answer any more questions. Rage boiled in the young party man's chest. He briskly headed to reprimand the irresponsible women. He entered the gate, and at that moment, a cat darted past his feet like a bullet, almost knocking him down. Then it rushed to the porch and disappeared through the doorway. Cursed thing," Vassili muttered. Looking around and not seeing any dogs, he went to the hut, knocked briefly on the door, and without waiting for an answer, entered. However, contrary to his expectations, in the sunlit room at the table sat Mario with an elderly grandmother about 80 years old. The cat that had almost knocked him down curled up on a bench. The women raised their heads and looked at the uninvited guest in surprise. "Hello," Kuznetsov's voice was serious. "Sit is Nastapenko. Why are you skipping work?" The girl just shyly glanced at the grandmother and silently lowered her eyes. "She is sick, son," the old woman answered kindly. "She can't work yet. She needs sleep and herbal infusions. If she's sick, she needs to go to the doctor, not sit in the hut." Kuznetsov continued to press. "There are no doctors here," the grandmother replied quietly. "Sit is Nastapenko. Either come to work or bring a doctor's note. Otherwise, you'll be charged. Avoiding work is punishable by law, and your father will be held responsible for encouraging idleness. I'll mark you as absent without excuse, and if I write a complaint about him, he'll be demoted." At the mention of her father, the girl blushed but just lowered her head further and clutched the edge of the embroidered tablecloth with trembling fingers. "Nah," Kuznetsov did not relent. "Where is that young lady?" "Oh," the grandmother was surprised. "Well, she just came in here with Ostapenko, the black-haired girl. I assume she's also shirking work." Saying this, the party men scanned the only room, realizing that there was no one here but the grandmother, Marya, and the cat, and nowhere to hide. "No, you imagined it, son," the grandmother chuckled. Without ceremony and without asking permission, Kuznetsov looked under the table, behind the dresser, under the bed, even lifted the lid of a large old chest. The hostess watched this with a strange smile, squinting slightly. Finding no one, Vassili threatened Marya again with all the party punishments and, completely puzzled, left. He clearly remembered the black hair and youthful figure of the stranger. It couldn't be a hallucination. It was clearly not the grandmother. The young blossoming woman had simply vanished. The next morning, gathering people for the political briefing, Kuznetsov heard a wave of whispers sweep through the crowd. "You came for nothing. Run away. Child, it's too soon. Go to Paulina. Leave." He saw Marya enter the hall, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She sat on the edge of the bench near the exit without raising her eyes, as if not hearing the crowd's chatter. Suddenly, the village elder approached and whispered to the party organizer, "Vassili, it's time to stop this nonsense. Let the girl go. You'll only make it worse. There's a curse on her. They say the Silent One's shadow will never leave her alone now. Paulina's only chance to save her. The story is only beginning." The sunset drenched the clouds in crimson haze. An evening thunderstorm was gathering. Lightning kept flashing, though the thunder still rumbled in the distance. People were still crowding around the lifeless body of the poor girl. The women were weeping and wailing, while the men stood tense and silent. The atmosphere was heating up. "It's all the party organizer's fault," someone shouted from the crowd. Yes. Why force the girl to work when she was marked by evil?" The crowd murmured, and in Kuznetsov's ears, the sound began to resemble the growl of a beast preparing to strike. One wrong move and it would tear him to pieces. The local paramedic arrived. Apparently, he was respected. With just a few words, he calmed the crowd. After a quick examination, he declared her dead. By the way, the beginning of this story is here. The first heavy raindrops hit the ground. You, the paramedic ordered, pointing to two strong lads. "Lift the body and follow me." They obeyed. The body really needed to be moved. Storm was ready to burst into a downpour from the heavens. And then Kuznetsov heard something that he could rightfully call the most unbearable sound he'd ever heard: scream of a father who had finally reached the scene. A nearly 2-meter tall, broad-shouldered man came running, shouting his daughter's name. He snatched her from the other's hands, hugged her to his chest, and collapsed to the ground. The crowd stepped back and fell silent. No one dared utter a word in the face of such grief. Only women's sobs and men's heavy breathing. The paramedic, seeing the situation, quickly opened his case, pulled out an ampoule and a syringe. Meanwhile, the grieving father scanned the crowd and saw the party organizer. For a few seconds, he stared at him with open hatred and rage, then whispered, "It's all you. Your fault. Because of you, she's gone." His voice grew louder. His eyes turned red. Suddenly, he laid his daughter's body on the ground and lunged at Kuznetsov, ready to tear him apart like a rag. A few men held him back just in time, grabbing him by the arms. In that same moment, The needle found its mark. The man struggled a bit more, then went limp. Morphine, the paramedic explained quietly. Let him sleep it off, or he'll do something stupid. You, and you two carry them and follow me. Following the medic's orders, two men picked up the body, while two more lifted Ostapenko and followed behind. The crowd began to disperse, but oh, what cold, bitter looks they threw at Vassili, and he just stood there, as if sunk in water. The girl's death, the father's reaction, the quiet hatred of the people, all of it was tearing his heart apart. The party organizer understood, somewhere, somehow. He made a mistake. His mind kept replaying. His decisions against party principles, everything seemed correct. But the events that followed, and his own gut feeling, said otherwise. He trudged home, so lost in thought that he didn't even notice when the true downpour began. By the time Vassili stepped into his house, he was soaked to the bone. Marussia was Ostapenko's only daughter. He has a son, too older, studying in the city, and his wife died last year. She was ill. That girl was his only joy, and now this tragedy. Vassili listened silently, hoping if only Baba Tanya wouldn't start blaming him, and she didn't. She only sighed sorrowfully. He couldn't eat. After poking at his food, he drank some hot tea. Warming up and calming down, he began to regain himself. No, I'm not to blame, he thought, relaxing under a knitted blanket. The paramedic examined the body. In the morning, the district officers will investigate everything, and if needed, we can call in a detective from the region. Marussia didn't just die like that. There will be signs of bruising for sure. Maybe it was the mute one. She's roaming around. Insane one knows what she's capable of. I need to learn more about her. Baba Tanya, tell me about this mute. Who is she, and why hasn't anyone dealt with her? The old woman turned pale again and gave him a frightened look. Then she sighed, drew the curtains tighter, crossed the window and doorway in a strange manner, Saturday on a stool, and began. It happened long ago, before the revolution. Back then, our great-grandfathers were serfs enslaved. There was a family here, 5 sons and the youngest daughter. Her name's long forgotten, but they say she was so beautiful that every woman and women alike turned their heads to look. But though she was beautiful, God didn't bless her in other ways. She was mute. Her kin tried everything, took her everywhere, but she never spoke a word in her life. Still, that didn't stop people from liking her. You know how Minorithi don't much care for chatty women. One young lad started courting her, and she didn't mind, but Trouble Kamath landowner saw her. He was a terrifying man, didn't value the lives of the peasants, and a notorious womanizer never passed a skirt. He saw her and thought, jackpot, beautiful, and mute, can't speak, can't write, so he took her to his manor. You can guess why, but she came from a pious family, raised in strict faith. She couldn't bear what happened to her. One night she ran into the forest with a rope, decided to win the shame and suffering, made a noose, and that was it. But the night she did it wasn't just any night. It was Autumnmire Offie's day, a night when the boundary between the living and the dead was thin, and evil spirits roamed the land. And one such spirit saw what the girl was doing. Her soul flew away to where, it's not for us to know, but it took her body for himself. Since then, from spring to fall, he wanders in her body through the forest and near the village, looking for someone to destroy. He feeds on fear, drains it all out, and then takes life itself. And if someone sees her, misfortune is sure to follow. She appears with pale skin, tangled hair, and burning eyes, says nothing, just stands and stares. That's why she's called the mute, and anyone she appears to is doomed. Only Paulina knows how to lift this curse from a person. It takes days, but she can do it. But you didn't give the poor girl time to reach Pauline, and so she perished. Kuznetsov clutched his head in his hands. God, Granny, what kind of darkness do you people live in? He whispered. You're the one living in darkness. You godless man. Baba Tanya got angry for the first time. I told you everything. Listen and remember, there's no law against unclean spirits, except not going near the forest after sunset. And if anything happens, go to Paulina for help. Oh, come on, Vassili barely contained his boiling frustration. If she went into the forest alone, I mean this whole tale now, then who knows what really happened to her? Who saw the evil spirit take her? Have you ever thought about how stories like this even start? The wise woman told the people what happened. Those who can see can look into the past and understand the events. It's so hard with the uneducated. Your heads are stuffed with superstition. Vassili buried his face in his hands, and the old woman suddenly snapped. What makes you think your head isn't stuffed? You were raised on promises and tales, just like us. But will your promises come true? An old way should be respected, and old people listened to. she will come to you? You see. Oh Lord, what am I saying? Old fool, forgive me. With that, she scurried into the other room, once again leaving the party official alone. Kuznetsov's thoughts were tearing his mind apart. On one hand, his conscience and intuition, condemning him for his callousness and blind faith in the letter of the law. On the other, laws of the party and his duty, which showed he was absolutely right. Exhausted by his own thoughts, he went to bed, hoping that morning would finally put everything in its place. Summer brought warm showers and thunderstorms. The lush greenery welcomed the moisture, while the villagers kept waiting for the clouds to part and the scorching sun to dry the ground, preparing the grass for mowing. People still came to the political information meetings in the mornings, but only because the pressure and forceful backing of the party were dangerously strong. They simply listened, without participation or involvement, and then left without paying attention to the party organizer, ignoring his instructions and suggestions. What had happened to Marussia had completely stripped Kuznetsov of any respect. However, the party organizer continued doing his job, pleased that he was following the letter of the law and serving the party despite everything. Finally, the rains ended, and sunny days became more frequent. Moisture and heat, the perfect time for mushrooms, and the forest surrounding the village was very generous. By the way, the beginning of this story is here. One weekend, Vassili decided to go mushroom hunting. He loved mushrooms deeply, and his housekeeper, old woman Tanya, couldn't go far anymore. Her knees ached. "Bring me some mushrooms, and I'll cook them with sour cream for you," she would say. And so, right at dawn, he set out. Dew on the grass, the trilling song of a nightingale, silence, chase, and pink clouds on the horizon. Nature, as always, was unfailingly beautiful. Vassili began searching under young pines when suddenly he saw a figure. He frowned, peered closer, and saw that it was a woman, slim, black-haired, holding a basket of herbs. "Got you, now I'll bring you to light, you parasite," he thought, watching the stranger closely. Yes, it was the very same young woman he'd seen entering Baba Polia's house. The woman was slowly heading toward the village, gathering herbs and neatly placing them in her basket. All the while, she was murmuring and whispering something. Vassili followed her as quietly as possible, planning to see where she would go this time. Just before turning onto the first village street, the woman stopped, listened, and glanced back, as if sensing something. After a moment's pause, she smiled thoughtfully and continued on. Just as Kuznetsov expected, she entered the healer's yard and disappeared into the house. Without wasting a second, the party man rushed after her. "You old hack," he thought, "not only do you mislead people, but you're also hiding a parasite. I'll catch you both red-handed, then no one will be able to help you." Without knocking, he burst into the house, but he saw only the old woman, who was laying herbs out on the table. She turned to the unexpected guest and looked at him in surprise. "Where is she?" The party man growled instead of greeting, and started inspecting the room, rudely peeking into every corner. But he quickly realized that there was no one else in the house, besides the old woman and himself. "Where is she?" he shouted, forgetting all manners. "Who are you looking for?" "Son," the hostess replied serenely. "The woman, the young one with black hair. Where are you hiding her?" "I understand, dear. You're young, fiery, seeing girls everywhere, but you're looking in the wrong place. I'm too old for you. I have no daughters or granddaughters. Go to Demian, the neighbor. He's got 3 daughters. Maybe you'll find your girl there." Saying this in a slight tone, the old lady burst into merry, ringing laughter. Clenching his teeth in fury, Kuznetsov left empty-handed, but he firmly resolved to track down and expose the shameless liars, and to restore his reputation and silence all the wishers. Realizing that he wouldn't find support among the local population, or even the local police, Vassili decided to personally track and expose the girl avoiding work and later deal with the old woman who fancied herself a healer. He began deliberately walking past the herbalist's house every day, but he only ever saw Baba Polia tending the garden. Attempts to find the girl in the meadows early in the morning also yielded no results anymore. Then he decided to follow her at night. And finally, a good opportunity arose. Baba Tanya went to bed early, and sleep eluded Vassili. He stepped onto the porch and listened. Silence. The whole village was asleep. Even the dogs were quiet. In the sky, the full moon lit up the few clouds. You could almost read a book. A better time for surveillance was hard to imagine. No, he hadn't forgotten the old tales or the terror he'd once experienced himself. But that desire to justify and restore his reputation in the eyes of the villagers was stronger than fear, even mystical fear. So that night, Vassili threw on a light jacket and quietly slipped out the gate. Did it think he might meet the mute? Yes, but firmly believing in a physical explanation for the phenomenon. He considered her mentally ill and intended to detain her. Same as always. Unseen by anyone, Kuznetsov sneaked up to Baba Polya's house. One window still glowed with light. The curtains were tightly drawn, but maybe there was a gap. Knowing the healer had no dogs, Vassili crept into the yard and nearly stepped on a cat, which bolted from under his feet with a loud wail and ran toward the house. Cursing under his breath, Vassili went silent, crouching behind the raspberry bushes. He listened and waited. Nothing. Silence. After waiting a bit longer, he moved closer to the house and began peeking into the windows, searching for any gap. But no, all the windows were tightly covered. It was impossible to see anything. I'll wait until they go to bed, he thought. Maybe the girl will come out. He waited an hour, maybe a little more. At some point, the annoying mosquitoes disappeared. The nightingale fell silent. The wind stopped blowing. All sounds vanished, as if the entire world had sunk under water. Must be drowsiness messing with me, thought Kuznetsov, slapping his cheeks. But the lamp in the window had gone out, and still no one came out. His eyelids grew heavy, and Vassili was about to head home when suddenly, in the raspberry bushes, he saw a pale silhouette. Got you, the party man rejoiced, and rushed to intercept the moving figure. Stop, who goes there? He shouted in military fashion, running at full speed toward his target. The figure didn't even try to hide. On the contrary, she stopped and turned toward him. State your name and surname, citizen, he blurted out, excited. In the moonlight, he clearly saw the woman's face and his mind refused to comprehend. It was a woman with long, dirty, tangled hair. She wore a light dress, torn at the hem and stained, her face deathly pale, and her eyes glowed with a mystical red light. She stared at the man silently, then raised her hand and pointed a finger at him. Kuznetsov was seized by an indescribable, primal terror beyond any control. He let out a scream with all the force his lungs could manage. Losing all sense, he turned to flee but tripped over something, fell, hit his head, and plunged into darkness. When he came to, Vassili didn't immediately understand what had happened. In the dim light of a kerosene lamp, he saw a young woman leaning over him. Black hair, pale skin, delicate features. Without a doubt, this was the very girl he'd been trying to track all this time. She sat by the bed where he lay. Her eyes were closed. She was chanting something. In her hands smoldered a bundle of herbs. The scent of the smoke was pleasant. Coming. Kuznetsov listened. The words were all familiar, yet he could not grasp their meaning, as if their sense was hidden from his mind. But at that moment, he felt so good, as if he were drifting down a quiet river in a small boat, untroubled by anything. But consciousness was returning, and with it, his party duty. Kuznetsov closed his eyes, inhaled, exhaled, then propped himself up on one elbow and looked around. To his disappointment, the girl was gone. Only the old woman handed him a mug of herbal tea, saying, "Drink, my dear, regain your strength."